So welcome everyone. Welcome to UPSC CSE. Let's crack UPSC CSE in English with Unacademy. So folks, I've got you little something here. Let's see what it is. But briefly, first about me. So for all those who have come to attend this session, very good evening. So today's session will be about India-Afghanistan Part 1. Part 2, I'll take along with India-Russia. So it'll be, a better balance and better able to understand that. Briefly about me, to all those who are new to my class, I'm Siddhi Bangard, your mentor, educator and friend at Unacademy. I have a 3 years teaching experience. I have graduated from the IT Mesra Ranchi, appeared for 4 mains and interviews, and qualified all the MBA exams and postgraduated from XLRI Jamshedpur in HR. Now let's move. So there's something I want to show you, a little small video, and I hope you enjoy the video. There it is for you. And I hope the volume is good. Okay, so coming back here, folks, let's move on to today's session, India IR series, India's Western Neighbors Part 3. So I think the video is a little bit stuck. I don't know why that keeps happening all the time, but I hope it will be better this time and we'll premiere the video separately so that you can see it. With that, in this lecture, we'll be discussing India-Afghanistan relations. And in the coming lecture, we will be discussing India-Russia relations and some part of the India-Afghanistan relations also. All right? Okay. Next, going forward is, so India, as we know, that I've already discussed in a lot of sessions. Let's move on to India's land boundary neighbors. So if you look at here, when we are doing Afghanistan today, Afghanistan legally should be our land boundary neighbor. We should share some tip of Afghanistan, approximately 106 kilometers. Yes. However, that area is actually manned by the Gilgit-Baltistan Scouts or the Pakistani army, because that part is actually now in touch with, or is neighborhood with the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So that's why we should have a de jure boundary, or should legally had a boundary with Afghanistan, but we actually don't have a boundary with Afghanistan due to the Pakistani occupation of Kashmir. The population of Afghanistan is 32 million, all right, and as compared to our population of 1.35 billion, so it's 1/5 of us. It's a small country. Afghanistan is bigger than Bangladesh, but slightly smaller than Myanmar and almost the size of East Texas in America. The GDP, as you can see, of Afghanistan is very, very less, very extremely less. I mean, the only place which has a higher GDP or has a lower GDP than Afghanistan is actually Bhutan, but there is a huge difference in the size. Now, why is that? These are some of the questions that I'll be answering today. It has more to go first with the geography and then with the political stability of the country, that this country, which is so extremely beautiful, so extremely rich of history, has this kind of issues. Now, let's come back to here. So the HDI of Afghanistan is 170, the lowest, one of the least developed countries around the world, and with one of the least human development indices. Its parliament is actually called National Assembly, so it's not exactly parliament. The rule in Afghanistan is more by the rule of the elders. So there is a tribal community or the tribal council that comes together and they actually rule, and the president is one of them. It's a unitary presidential state. That means there is no federalism. There's one single center and it is run in a presidential form of government, and even that happened very, very late in Afghanistan's history. So today I'll briefly take you to this land which is very, very mysterious. We've heard a lot about Afghanistan in news. However, we know very little about the country. So today is the time to actually explore it. Let's see. Afghanistan is the direct neighbor, and as I told you, somewhat a smaller part of the boundary actually touches this region. This region is which should have been India's J&K, but is currently occupied by Pakistan. So if you look at it, Afghanistan is just a neighbor far away from us. So we have Pakistan in between Afghanistan and India. Please remember this position because I'll be using this position in one of Chanakya's Siddhant. And as you can see here, and in the maps that I will show you further, that Afghanistan is completely a landlocked country, just like we were talking about Nepal or we were talking about Bhutan. So to have access to any waterbound areas, it has to take either the help of Iran or of Pakistan or of India, and that is why we had the Chabar port in Iran, which was going through Afghanistan so that we could access Central Asia. In fact, Afghanistan was supposed to be India's gateway to Central Asia because we actually couldn't make Pakistan our gateway to Central Asia. I have already discussed that in India-Pakistan relationships. Coming here, do you guys recognize this Gandhar piece of art? All right. No, Rangesh, it is 106 kilometers. I confirmed it. It's 106 kilometers, not 80 kilometers. Good evening, everybody. So, do you guys remember this piece of art? It's a very, very famous piece of art. It's the Bamiya Buddha. It was all over in news when most of you were little kids in 2001. So, this was built during the the Greek Indo-Bactrian timings, or when the Greek were actually ruling Afghanistan. So this is a piece of Gandhar art which has been inspired by the Greek people. So and how do you see that it has been inspired by the Greek people? It's because of the small fine lines that are visible here, and this kind of cloth which Buddha is kind of wearing all around his body is actually called a toga in Greek. So it's a 12 to 20 feet long cloth made of white wool that is worn around. So Buddha is seen wearing this kind of garment. The pleats are very clear, and it was for the first time it happened in the history of Buddhism that Buddha was actually deified. So deification of Buddha actually started with the Gandhar art, and that's why they are so important. And in fact, one of the favorite questions of UPSC, the impact of Indo-Bactrians can be seen on the Gandhar art is a question that has been asked not once but twice in the mains examination, recently being I think 2018 or 2019 exam. Now there was this huge statue of Buddha carved out of a cliff in Afghanistan, and if you can see small holes all around this carving or these small holes, they all had wooden pegs that actually held the entire structure together, because after carving out the entire structure in stone, they used the stucco work to finally carve out the carvings, the final lines, and that work used to be held together by the wooden pegs that were there present inside these holes. And in 2001, unfortunately, Taliban destroyed this entire thing, and that's why now the Bamia Buddha is no longer there, and what you see is a completely vacant place in here. Now, talking about it, actually, this is one rich piece of history that I wanted you to familiarize with. And the reason why they actually did it. The reason why they did it, because at that point of time, UNESCO and USA and everybody were actually supplying aid to preserve these kind of important architectural or historical monuments. And there was not enough aid to actually take care of the people. So the Taliban decided to blow up the entire structure in 2001. And this picture which we see here has been taken in 2008, and this picture was back in 1990s. So you can see the difference, and now the heritage is long gone. We don't have anything, and similar thing happened in Syria also. So war leads to a lot of loss, both human wise and cultural wise. Let's come to Afghanistan. As we know, Afghanistan is primarily an agriculture based and mining based country. We don't have many industries there, primarily because of the geography. So Afghanistan has a very rough terrain. Almost 60 to 80% of the entire terrain is mountainous, huge mountains, and especially the Hindu Kush is very famous. The Pamir Knot is very famous. All these things are there in Afghanistan, and that is one of the reasons it is very difficult for industries to grow. In fact, most of the entire, what we see, the water bodies in Afghanistan, they are mostly inland water bodies. That is, they do not drain outside. So you don't see a lot of rivers running crisscross Afghanistan, and that's why most of the area is dry. However, Afghanistan receives a lot of snow in the Hindu Kush mountains. But because of this lack of proper land or lack of water, there has not been much industrialization, and thanks to the political instability that Afghanistan has been facing since a very long time, there is a complete lack of development in the modern terms, and therefore it also fares very lowly in the HDI index, which we'll also see why. So agriculture, primary exports are fruits and nuts. In fact, most of you must be remembering that story called Kabuli Wala. That person used to get fruits and nuts for the little girl. In fact, there was a movie by Balraj Sahani on the same name. Mining. So Afghanistan has a huge resource of mines, approximately of $1 trillion ores or mining resources can be found there, but they have not been exploited as of now. Political wise, so you'll be surprised to know Afghanistan is actually known as the graveyard of empires. It is said to be a place where empires have come to an end, not actually blossomed, just like Magad was or Bihar was in ancient times. So why did that happen? First, let's talk about the Indus Valley civilization. Afghanistan was a strong or important part of the Indus Valley civilization. However, it actually eventually ended up dying there. The Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, so Alexander also met his fate in this place. The Mauryan Empire died here. And finally, the US Empire also died here. That's why it's known as a grave of empires. So if we see Afghanistan's history, political history or normal history, starting from Indus Valley civilization, we had the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, then we had the Mauryan Empire, the Kushanas. So that was the last of the Hindu kingdoms. Then came the Hotak dynasty in the 18th century, which actually established Afghanistan as an independent state, or the concept of Afghanistan first came into being with the Hotak dynasty. And as of now, Afghanistan is a unitary presidential Islamic republic. It is only in 2014, as late as 2014, that for the first time there was a democratic transition of power, and Ashraf Ghani became the president, and Hamid Karzai passed over the power to Ashraf Ghani. Now, coming here, socially, it has very strong ancient ties with India. In fact, Afghanistan lied on the ancient Silk Route. Buddhism and Hinduism were the ancient religions of this place. As we can see, the Mauryan Empire and the Kushanas actually brought in Buddhism and Hinduism, and we obviously see the Buddha statues. Islam knocked in a little late in the 8th century, and since then it has been a gateway of invasion into North India. So all the invaders that have come into North India, they have actually come from Afghanistan. They have been the Pathans of the Afghanistan or the Central Asian tribes that have come through the Afghanistan passes into India. They have been the Khaljis, the Ghazanvids, the Mughals and the Duranis. Some of them decided to stay in India, some of them invaded, raided, looted and went back. Now, another important piece of history that we have from Afghanistan is Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Frontier Gandhi or the forebearer of the Red Shirts movement, is also from Afghanistan. He's a Pathan from Afghanistan or a Pashtun from Afghanistan. Afghanistan, as of now, is primarily known for being a very, very conservative country, which is very poor and is known for the terrorism or Taliban as we know it. However, as we'll go into Afghanistan's history, we'll actually know that Afghanistan was not always like this. In fact, truth be told, it was one of the most forward moving nations. The earlier rulers were very, very forward moving. In fact, as far back as in 1923, they had these rules of saving their girl child or actually having women's participation in politics. So that's very, very far-fetched if we look at it now. India didn't even know what are we going to do with the independence, but these people had it very much sorted out. So we'll see some bit of that also. In fact, one of the reasons why Afghanistan fell to a lot of political instability is because the rulers, the then rulers or the original Afghani rulers tried to have in a lot of Western reforms in their country, which was not liked by all the tribal councils. And hence, there were a lot of coups, lot of assassinations of the rulers. And that became one of the major reasons why finally Afghanistan fell into the hand of Taliban and became the Afghanistan that we know right now. Coming back, the geography of Afghanistan, it is our gateway to Central Asia, and that's why we were building that Zeran's Herat highway to actually access Central Asia through the Chabahar port of Iran, which now we have lost to China. The area of Afghanistan is close to 0.65 million square kilometer. It is completely landlocked and its neighbors are Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. That's why I told you it's a gateway to Central Asia. China, and it is majorly mountainous and has rugged topography. It is also a member of a lot of international organizations, the Commonwealth, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, the G77, the United Nations, and likewise. Varun, as of now, Afghanistan, yes, not fully, but majorly depends on agriculture and mining. That's what are the two primary sources of income are. In fact, there are not many important sources of income when it has once again fallen back to the rule of Taliban. So as the US is withdrawing, the things there are getting even worse. So let's look at the political map of Afghanistan. And as you can see, it has Pakistan here. This could have been the border with India, which is now in the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. This is the famous Wakhan corridor that has been in news for a while. Yes. Then there is this Pamir Knot, which is here. Tajikistan on its north. Uzbekistan here on its left. Turkmenistan again on its left. And Iran again further in the western side. And Pakistan in the south and the eastern side. Kabul is the capital city of Afghanistan and a very, very important air base also. Herat again is a very, very important place in Pakistan, sorry, in Afghanistan, from where we were actually taking that Hiran-Zaranj highway to the Central Asian countries. And this is the most famous Kandahar air base, where that important Kandahar hijacking happened and Lal Krishna Advani had to take a couple of terrorists and we had to free them at the Kandahar air base. Helmand is again a very important province of Afghanistan. Moving ahead, let's talk about the ethnic groups that are present here. So 42% of Afghanis are actually Pashtuns. And if you remember the India-Pakistan relationships, when I was talking about that, I also said that Pashtuns is again the biggest minority in Pakistan. So how come Pashtuns became minority in Pakistan? So because of the lot of civil wars that have happened in Afghanistan, a lot of Pashtuns actually sought sanctuary in Pakistan, or they actually migrated to Pakistan, and that's why they formed the largest minority in Pakistan, and that's a major reason of tussle there, because Pashtuns want a piece of political power given their highest minority status, which is not being given to them as of in Pakistan. And in fact, that creates a lot of rift between Pakistan and Afghanistan, because in Afghanistan they are a majority, and in Pakistan they are not treated at par of their status, or they should have the political power. So that is why there's always a confusion and there's always a chaos between Pakistan Afghanistan relations, of which India makes kind of good use all the time, and we are trying to make good use. 27% of the Afghanistan Tajiks or come from Tajikistan. They are Hazaras, Uzbeks, Ayamaks, Turkmen, and Balochis. In fact, the Balochistan was also divided by the Durand line. So Durand line is a line that is a boundary line between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and which still creates a lot of problems. So that's the second part of the problem between Afghanistan and Pakistan, or the Afghanistan-Pakistan dispute. Religion, the country is Islamic. It is officially, Islam is the official declared religion of the country, and the other 0.3% people are the minorities. Now, coming here, what is the importance of Afghanistan? As you can see here in this cartoon, Afghanistan is actually a graveyard of empires about which I already talked. Now, when I told you about that, look at the position of Afghanistan. Pakistan comes in between Afghanistan and India, and Pakistan is Indian enemy. And according to Mandal Siddhant or Chanakya's philosophy, your neighbor's enemy is your friend. So Pakistan's neighbor is Afghanistan, which is Pakistan's enemy is India's friend, and that's why, as per the Mandal Siddhant, Afghanistan is India's natural ally, and that's what the status we actually give to Afghanistan. India, what is the importance of Afghanistan to India? So India is actually interested in retaining Afghanistan as a friendly state, so that we have access to Central Asia, and also it gives us the capacity to monitor Pakistan and cultivate assets in Afghanistan to monitor the activities in Pakistan, so they do not spread terrorism into our country. Also, a stable and peaceful Afghanistan will then not be able to become a sanctuary for terrorists, which Pakistan keeps using for its own benefit. So Pakistan keeps using the boundary, the porous boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan for harboring terrorists. So if Afghanistan is peaceful, if it is politically stable, then it can protect its boundaries, and the terrorists won't get a sanctuary in Afghanistan. If they don't get a sanctuary in Afghanistan, it will be easier to tackle terrorism. So that's our another important primary interest. In fact, that was one of the reasons that USA actually invaded Afghanistan or to cull Taliban, because they were not handing out Osama bin Laden, and it brought a decent amount of peace in Afghanistan, though the country became completely wanton and lost whatever it had. Also, India's interest in Afghan is more than Pakistan centrist, as I just told you. Yes, we want to have a trump card, or we want to have a diplomatic score over Pakistanis by having friendly relations with Afghanistan, but it is also one of our aspirations to be a regional power. So we want to act as a big brother to Afghanistan and tell it that, okay, if you don't receive any aid, but we are your nearest neighbors, we are the regional superpower here in Asia, we are going to help you out. Also, Islamic fundamentalism in Pakistan and Afghanistan is actually very, very detrimental to India's interest, because Islamic fundamentalism gives rise to Hindu fundamentalism in India, and it triggers Hindu-Muslim riots, which is not good domestically for our country. Additionally, as I had already told you, Afghanistan has a mineral wealth of about $1 to $2 trillion of iron ore, lithium, which is a very, very rare metal and very, very important for electronics, chromium, very important for steel, natural gas and petroleum. So it's a storehouse of minerals. It's a very, very important, very, very wealthy storehouse of minerals. So anybody who gets to access to Afghanistan first, if they're building infrastructure there, or if they can tap their natural resources from Afghanistan, it will be very, very beneficial. And that's why we also had the Tapi pipeline, about which I already discussed in India-Pakistan relationships. Coming finally is safeguarding Indian investments and personnel in Afghanistan is very, very important to India. So the other reason why we want to have friendly relations is we are already very much invested in Afghanistan to the amount of $3 billion. We have given approximately $3 billion in aid and investment to Afghanistan. So if we can have friendly relations, it will be helpful for us to protect our personnel and our workers which are working in Afghanistan. Moving further, now is the time for the great story of Afghanistan's history. So this is the last 10-15 minutes of our entire lecture. Today I'll be closing with Afghanistan's history, and in the next section or in the next coming lecture we will be discussing Afghanistan-India relations in detail. We will discuss Afghanistan-Pakistan axis, we will discuss US interest in Afghanistan, and how is the China-Pakistan axis playing out in Afghanistan. So all these issues we'll be discussing in the upcoming session in India-Russia. And at that point of time, we will be better able to understand what was the Soviet presence in Afghanistan like. So let's focus on the story. How did it happen? So I'm going to the time of the modern history of Afghanistan. I'm not considering the ancient or the medieval history of Afghanistan. I'm starting with the modern history of Afghanistan. So between 16th and 18th century, the Uzbekis of Bukhara, the Iranian Safavid dynasty, and the Indian Mughals actually ruled the parts of territory. In fact, you will be surprised to know, or many of you must be knowing, that Babur first occupied bits of territory of Afghanistan and then made his way into India. And he had to fight a lot in the 16th century. In the middle of the 16th century, he had to fight a lot to actually gain a stronghold in India. Babur was the one who established the Mughal dynasty in India. Yes? So these are the Indian Mughals that we are talking about. However, while they were ruling, all of them occupied some major chunks of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan was known as an entity called Afghanistan. It was just separate independent states ruled by separate independent rulers. Then, in the early 18th century, came Mirwais Hotak. As I had just told you, the Hotak dynasty came into being. He was a local tribesman. So he made Afghanistan independent. He fought all these wars with the Uzbeks, the Iranians, and the Indian Mughals, and made Afghanistan independent. He consolidated the entire Afghan territory, and for the first time, the Afghani entity emerged on the political map of the world. Following him, Ahmad Shah Durrani. Do you remember this name? In 1747, he is the founder of the modern state of Afghanistan. He actually established his capital at Kandahar, which I already showed you on the map, which is here. So he established his capital at Kandahar here, and he is the founder of the modern state of Afghanistan. What do we mean by modern state? The Afghanistan that we see right now, the very, very political Afghanistan that we see right now in today's history or in today's modern world. So this person of the Durrani Empire, he was one of the last people of the empires to have been here. Now, this is the same guy who actually won the third war or the third battle of Panipat against the Marathas. If you have read Bipin Chandra, there it was that Marathas at that point of time could not get the support of any other Indian kingdom because they had irked everyone. And that's why they lost this battle or the third battle of Panipat to Ahmad Shah Durrani. He's the very same man. And that's when he looted entire India, defeated the Marathas, which also finally led to the falling of India into the hands of British. It was the time when East India Company was already there. And in the coming few times, because Marathas had lost their mojo, Mughal Empire was already declining, and Marathas lost their mojo in the third battle of Panipat. Finally, in the battle of Plassey, the East India Company was finally able to get hold of the entire crown jewel that they called India. Now, coming in the late 19th century, Afghanistan became a buffer state in the great game between British India and Russian Empire. Now, what is that? So, at that point of time, in the late 19th century, both the British India and Russian empires were at the peak of their powers, and they were both fighting for more and more territories. Now, Russians already had the Central Asian nations. Now, if you have access to Central Asia, and if you look at the map, if you have access to Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan and all the other Central Asian countries, the next country that will obviously be your next hotspot for acquisition will be Afghanistan, and from then on you'll come to a Pakistan and then to India. So India was not only known as a crown jewel of British India, but it was also known as that's a very, very profitable colony. So anybody would try to acquire it, and British were extremely protective about India, as I've told in many of my international relations series classes, that we tried to have Nepal as a buffer state or Bhutan as a buffer state for similar reasons with China, so that the Soviets do not enter from China and come to occupy India. Do you guys remember that? I have talked it about in India-Nepal series and in India-Bhutan series also, that the reason we kept them as buffer states and we never colonized those two important parts. Similarly for Afghanistan. So Afghanistan became a buffer state between the Russian Empire, which had spread till the Central Asian countries, and India. And how did the British actually help doing that? So they tried to fight multiple Afghan wars. They tried to go to Afghanistan, occupy Afghanistan, and try to turn it into a democratic form of government or install their own puppet governments there, so that their kings will act at the directions of the British Army. Now the entire problem was that, if you actually consider, are there any doubts so far, or is it understandable? Okay, great. So what happened, because of the rugged topography of Afghanistan, so much mountainous regions, very difficult to get inside, very difficult to actually find a plane and fight. The Pathans of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan primarily, the tribes that we have listed, which I just told you about, are warrior tribes. They're very good at fighting. So whenever the British used to go there, they used to be defeated. So in the first Anglo-Afghan war, they were able to gain some traction, but that was very, very brief. And by the third Anglo-Afghan war, that is by 1978, it was almost clear that they will not be able to, sorry, 1878, it was almost clear that they will not be able to do anything there. And that was the time when the country, Afghanistan, actually became a monarchy under Amanullah Khan. Now this Amanullah Khan, he was a very forward-looking man. He introduced huge reforms in the country regarding economy, regarding women's empowerment, regarding the empowerment of the social strata, which was very low in the country, regarding the trade. So he introduced a lot of Western reforms in there, and that actually made him hugely unpopular amongst the other tribes in Afghanistan. Now, as I told you, Afghani tribes are very, very good warriors, brilliant warriors. So there, the decision of who is going to rule does not happen democratically. It happens with the war of the sword. So they actually assassinated Amanullah Khan, and 50 years later, after 50 years of rule of Amanullah Khan, Zahir Shah was there, and he was also overthrown because he tried to do similar kind of reforms but in a slower manner. So he was also overthrown and a republic was established in Afghanistan. So the establishment of republic in Afghanistan goes very, very far back in history. Even when India could think about it, they already had a republic. Now, that republic was actually aided by the Soviet Russia. They helped Afghanistan in a coup or in a military coup in 1978 to become a socialist state. This was the time when Afghanistan started falling to the dogs. This was the time when Afghanistan started turning into what we know it as today. Otherwise, Afghanistan used to be a very, very forward country. It wasn't the Afghanistan that we see today, full of terrorism or full of rights against women or full of abuses against women. It wasn't like that. So why did it all happen? So when it became the first socialist state or Soviet protectorate, so this 1978 was also a time, if you remember, yesterday when I was talking about India-Pakistan relationships, I mentioned the 1972 Nixon's visit to China. So this was also the time when the Pakistan, China and American axis was coming into power. And this was also the time when Pakistan had started harboring the Mujahideens or the fighters, yes, which have now become the present day Taliban. So Pakistan was harboring these Mujahideen rebels and they wanted to use it against the Soviet Union. So obviously when this Soviet protectorate came, or when Afghanistan became a republic, they also tried to introduce certain reforms in a very, very slow manner, which was again not liked. But this time the Soviet Afghan war was there because there was an internal civil war amongst the tribes. Some wanted to support the reforms, some did not wanted to support the reforms, but now they had a foreign entity to fight against. So there was the Soviet Afghan war in the 1980s against the Mujahideen rebels. So the rebels who were harbored in Pakistan, as Hillary Clinton had remarked, that the snakes have come to bite you because you harbored these rebels. And unfortunately, actually, Hillary Clinton did mention these people as snakes, or that they have been harbored by Pakistan, when it keeps telling Pakistan to actually remove terrorism or to do something about terrorism. But originally, these rebels were financed by USA only to counter the Soviet influence in Afghanistan, or they were financed by the United Kingdom or the Chinese to counter the growing Soviet influence in Afghanistan. So finally, these people had a fight. Obviously, a lot of lives were lost, and after a decade-long war in 1996, finally Taliban took hold of Afghanistan. And in the next 5 years, it was the hell that they created that came to be known as the Afghanistan of today. So they created that hell, shooted people left, right, and center, raped women, and Afghanistan's HDI index fell to the lowest levels. This was the time when they destroyed the Bamia Buddhas. They destroyed a lot of history and culture of this country, a beautiful, beautiful country, completely distorted its natural and its economic landscape. And the height reached after the September attacks on the World Trade Towers that happened in the US. That's when the US asked Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden. And when the Taliban did not relent and they were supporting him, in fact, it was thought that he was living in one of those caves which I just showed you, the holes in those great cliffs, that Osama bin Laden was living in one of those caves. That was the time for a witch hunt for Osama bin Laden started, and US invaded Afghanistan. And surprisingly, even when a third country from the Western world, very, very far away Western world, was invading Afghanistan, the local Afghani population was very much in favor of the US. They really wanted respite from the Taliban. And finally, US was able to overthrow the Taliban and handed over the administration to Hamid Karzai. This man actually ruled for almost 14 years, unabashed, as the president of the interim administration of Afghanistan. And at that point, to assist him, there was the International Security Assistance Force, which is nothing but the force that was the combined forces of the NATO allies. They were there to defend the flagelling administration that was recently set up in Afghanistan, so that the Taliban doesn't attack it again. And the UN Security Council also assisted it. That was the time when aid started flowing to Afghanistan in huge numbers to actually rebuild the entire war-torn country. And then in September 2014, Ashraf Ghani became the first democratically elected or democratically transfer of power happened, and he became the first time president of a as an outcome of a democratic election. Now, this time the NATO by the 2014 had come, and USA had spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, so much so that their entire economy had took a setback, and still they were not able to come out of it. See, that is the reason why it is called a graveyard of empires. Whoever goes inside, you can go inside. It's like the Chakravyuh that Abhimanyu faced. You know how to go inside the Chakravyuh, but you really don't know how to come out of it. In fact, America is still finding problems in coming out of it, because the moment you start withdrawing, the terrorist activities start going up. But this time the government were resolute. So consistently, from George Bush to Obama to Trump, they have tried to withdraw the forces there. So the forces which were somewhere, the NATO allies which were somewhere in 1 lakh or 2 lakh numbers there, is now reduced to a number of 16,000 troops on ground. So in 2014, NATO formally ended the International Security Assistance Force, or the combat operations in Afghanistan, and transferred the security responsibility fully to the Afghan government. However, as a follow-up measure, so that the Afghan government is just not left in conundrum or left in doldrums to actually handle the entire thing, because it was also new and they were finding a lot of difficulty to actually control Taliban. NATO also led an operation called Operation Resolute Support, in which some boots were still to remain on ground, some foreign boots were still to remain on ground, and they were to help Afghanistani soldiers to train them to learn to fight on their own. They are still doing it, but the reduced presence has only increased the terrorist activities in Afghanistan, as we see recently. And recently, the USA ended up signing a pact with Taliban so that it remains a peaceful place. They find some conclusion to the entire terrorist issue in Afghanistan, and the US can successfully withdraw, but nothing has been happening. and India was actually left out from the entire discussion table of Taliban, Afghanistan, and the US. In fact, even Pakistan was not fully included. So that has irked both Pakistan and India because they are the closest neighbors, and it is India. India thinks that as a very, very close neighborhood country and as a strong regional power, its opinion should have been taken because we can actually go and help Afghanistan, uh, the soonest one, because we are the nearest one. And we have a very, very important stake in Afghanistan, as I just discussed in the importance of Afghanistan, but that wasn't done. So we'll discuss that and more in the next session. This is all for today. This is what I wanted to discuss. So this is from 1980s till the present. So this is a brief about Afghanistan history. I did not go into the ancient history because that was not very relevant to our exam. But this is briefly about Afghanistan. So any doubts so far, or should we call it a day? And in the India-Russia part, I will take it in greater detail. Are we good to go? So I'll call it a night. I guess we are good to go. So with that, folks, I'll just share my Telegram group and channel. So for all those who are new, this is my Telegram group link for current affairs, and this is my channel link. Here I post all my upcoming videos and sessions either on YouTube or on Unacademy. Yes, so you can join the group or the link, whichever is convenient to you, so that you can always be up to date. And this is an entire IR series that will be running. So I will be covering the entire Asia edition on YouTube, and possibly we will be moving over some of the IR editions to Unacademy platform also in the month of August. So see you then. Good night and take care, everybody.